I'm an attending physician at the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. I see patients on both an inpatient and an outpatient basis. I direct two clinics, one right in Hopkins Hospital itself, which deals with various sorts of sexual issues, and I'm the director of another program which has been recognized by the Justice Department for the work that we've done, and that deals with sexual disorders, including conditions such as pedophilia. I was on a DSM committee, that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, on the subcommittee that deals with conditions such as pedophilia. I've been invited to address colleges of judges, invited to a White House conference. I've been also asked to address subcommittees of the United States Senate. I provided information to the European parliaments. I told the attorneys in this case what I tell every attorney. I am willing to see if I can be of some help, but I'm going to call it as I see it, and there aren't going to be any guarantees ahead of time as to whether or not what I'm going to say will or won't be helpful to you. I should make it very clear that the attorneys who approached me in this case had exactly that same attitude. I was instructed that that's exactly what they had in mind. There's a big difference between throwing out an allegation and making an innuendo and having an established fact. If we establish that Joe Paterno did something wrong, we can look at it and see how it is that perhaps that happened and what he could have done better. We also have to acknowledge that people make mistakes, and even if he did do something wrong, does that mean it was because of malicious disregard or for selfish motives, or that he just didn't have a full understanding of the situation? In this case, I have, in reviewing the Freeh Report, not been able to persuade myself that Joseph Paterno did anything wrong. And even if he could have done more, and we can all do more, I certainly haven't seen evidence that his actions were based on selfish motives or some disregard for the well-being of children in the community. That said, then we need to look at the rest of his character, his personality, the way in which he has led his life. And in the case of Joe Paterno, if we're wondering whether he might or might not have done something wrong, and it isn't clear, the fact that he's always been a man of integrity, the fact that he's known to be a man of his word, the fact that he's provided leadership and been a role model of the community, in my judgment, becomes extremely important. To allow some people saying, well, we know that Joe Paterno could get anyone at Penn State to trump the facts, I just don't think is a responsible conclusion. Again, I'm not impugning the motives of the people who did the Freeh Report, but I don't think their conclusions are based on the facts. I think they're based on suppositions, on a conspiracy theory, on assumptions. That's not the way this should be decided, in my judgment. Sitting in the comfort of our living rooms and feeling, well, I think I would have handled it this way, is a very different experience from being in the middle of it with the emotion, the uncertainty, the confusion, and so on. In short, in 1998, I don't think I would have done anything different, hearing that this man had been accused and exonerated. And in 2001, having made a report to my superiors and feeling that they're going to pursue it further, I don't know that I would have done anything further either. Suppose that Joe Paterno had been my father. Suppose that Joe Paterno had been your husband. You still are going to be concerned about children, but you'd hope to God that your husband, your loved one, is going to be treated fairly. What we can hope will come out of all of this is that we can learn, that people can be better prepared, that people in the future, if they begin to suspect child sexual abuse, because of what we've learned, may be able to handle it better. That's what should come out of this, not putting blame after the fact, expecting that people should have known then what they couldn't have known then.
I was a former prosecutor. I was an FBI agent who investigated child sex crimes. I was a profiler, behavioral analyst, and my specialty was sexual exploitation of children. I was also a victim myself, and it's been my life's work to try to investigate, study, understand, educate people about, and prevent child sexual victimization. Well, at first I didn't want to become part of this case. I thought I knew everything about the case just from reading the media accounts. But when I read the SIC report, I realized that there was almost no mention at all of child sexual victimization, the concepts of them. For example, grooming is mentioned one time in the entire report. When you look at, there's no mention at all of nice guy offenders or pillar of the community offenders, acquaintance offenders, compliant victimization. It's just not mentioned at all. And these are the concepts that should have been the basis, the foundation of this investigation. I have a tremendous respect for Louis Freeh. He was my former boss, the director of the FBI. He's got a great reputation for investigating crimes. But unfortunately, in this case, he failed to look at it as a child sex crime. He did not put it in the context of child sexual victimization. Those crimes have a very different dynamic than every other garden variety crime. And unfortunately, because he didn't look at it in the context of child sexual victimization, that investigation went way down the wrong road. And we're left with something that terribly mischaracterizes what happened, and unfortunately, it's a terrible teaching tool for the rest of the country. Whenever a child sex offender comes into the room, people expect to be able to know that. They don't know that he could be a nice guy, a friend, a good person that you know and love. Sandusky was a very good groomer, and I put him at the top 1% of groomers that I've seen in this country just because of the boldness of his acts. The fact that he kept such a high-profile position both professionally and in his volunteer work with Second Mile put him under a lot of scrutiny, except that he effectively used that to prove to everybody else that he was a saint. If you don't understand how offenders behave and how victims behave, you misinterpret the evidence. You misinterpret people's behavior. If you understand how offenders act, you understand why people didn't know that he was an offender for decades. First of all, we live in a country in which there's a presumption of innocence. And you have to actually find facts to say somebody was involved in a conspiracy. You have to have evidence to support that, not conjecture, not saying that, well, you know, in general he ran the football program, so he was the king of this school, and saying because of that he should have known. When you're investigating an agreement to conceal, which is really a conspiracy, there are a number of things you're going to be looking for. You're going to be looking for communications that outline the agreement. You're going to be looking for documents that prove that they decided that they were going to cover something up. You're going to be looking for surreptitious meetings and audio recordings or video recordings or any kind of evidence. When I read the conclusions in the Freeh Report and then looked at the report and went through it word by word, line by line, there is no support for the conclusions that he made that there was actually a conspiracy. Another thing that stood out was the interpretation of some of the communications. For example, the 22701 email from Curley, the misinterpretation of that created the appearance that there was a conspiracy involved when you actually look at that in context with the other emails and documents around that same time period, that conspiracy completely crumbles. There is nothing there. What I can say is that based on the record today, there is absolutely no evidence that Joe Paterno was involved in a conspiracy to conceal anything about Sandusky. Blaming it on the culture of football or some kind of conspiracy when in fact it is the fact that we are not educating ourselves as to what real offenders do, what real victims act like, and how they use the dynamics of grooming to get access, authority, and control over children. If we don't learn those things, if we don't change our perspective as a country, we are going to continue to let people like Jerry Sandusky offend decade after decade after decade.